Welcome to the Zac Anesbury Show. Join one of marketing's rising stars, Dr. Zac Anesbury, as he sits down with leading academics and industry experts to explore the latest in marketing research and practice. Each episode features insights from top journal editors, esteemed professors, and professionals from some of the world's biggest brands. Dr. Zac Anesbury is a senior lecturer in marketing at Adelaide University and a senior marketing scientist at the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. Recognized with multiple emerging marketing researcher awards, he also serves as a senior associate editor at the Journal of Consumer Behavior. Tune in to the Zac Anesbury Show for expert perspectives on marketing careers, strategies, and cutting-edge research.
Welcome. On today's podcast, we have Professor Ray Taylor. Ray is a professor at Villanova University, Pennsylvania, United States. Ray is not only a world-class advertising researcher known for his work in the Super Bowl, but he is a world-class guy. As a young academic, I find a lot of commonality with him on the fundamentals and beliefs about our field. And to be honest with you, it's a little bit of a relief. Maybe I'm on the right track if I align so well with someone of such quality. I hope you too can seek these harmonies and learn from Ray's incredible experience. Ray's multi-decade tenure as the editor-in-chief at the International Journal of Advertising provides us with incredible guidance into how the journal works and what it aims to publish in the next 5 years. We are lucky enough to get some sneak peeks into his recent endeavor, co-authoring a book based on Super Bowl advertising. Links to this are available in the show notes for those of you who will be purchasing the book, like I know I will be. But without further ado, Ray Taylor. Ray, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. For me, it's morning, but of course, you based in the US, it's the afternoon then / evening for you. But I'm just very, very grateful that we managed to find a time that sort of somewhat overlapped for us. I've known you for a short amount of time relative to the period of our lives. But what I've known from you has been nothing but exceptional. So did you want to provide the audience with a little bit of overview as to who you are and sort of a bit of your background?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Zach. It's really a pleasure, to be here. And I should explain first, my middle name's Ray. My friends all call me that. So to those watching this podcast, if you reach out, call me Ray. But my first name is Charles. I won't go into the whole story, but it has to do with it being a Catholic family. And the first names used to be these really obscure names of popes that kids would probably get made fun of or something like that. So they started calling the firstborn males by the middle name. So that's where that originates. But I'm professor of marketing, the John A. Murphy Professor of Marketing at Villanova University here in the Philadelphia area. I've been studying advertising for a long time, and I'm a past president of the American Academy of Advertising. And I edit the International Journal of Advertising, which I love doing because I love keeping up on the literature and publishing good articles. But advertising has been my main focus. But I'm also very interested in branding and consumer behavior. And I'm lucky to be able to get to do some consulting around that. And I should also mention, I should plug, I write a column for Forbes. .com. Because of the day job, it's kind of an occasional column, but it's fun to do.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so we're going to talk about all of those different aspects, especially the International Journal of Advertising, or how it's fondly referred to, IJA, and a little bit of your forward stuff as well. So definitely worth listening to. If people were to find you, say you're Google Scholar, and you mentioned that it's Charles and Ray, how can they possibly find you, just so there's no confusion?
Yeah, I've always written under Charles R. Taylor.
Okay.
Another one of those quirky things. My middle name is actually just Ray, not Raymond. So trying to use Charles Ray Taylor just creates confusion. And it's enough anyways, right? Just having the middle initial. I actually like it when people are bold enough to not use their middle initial, but Charles Taylor is just way too common. Well, there's a real bad guy in Liberia by that name.
Yeah, you don't
was
want
a dictator for many years there. So
And I'll put URLs or links to your staff homepage and your Google Scholar anyway, if anyone wants to check it out. And as a little bit of a note for myself, I'll probably add the link to the journal as well. So if anyone's interested in finding out more about the articles or submitting their work there, that would be great. So what I quite often like to do is, we're going to hear about your unbelievable career, and I'm sure there's much more to come. But I'd really like to figure out, how did people start to realize whether it was marketing or whether it was academia, or what was it that sort of first ignited that spark in you to pursue this type of career?
Yeah, well, Zach, my undergrad. I went to the University of Michigan, and I started out in engineering and didn't really know what I wanted to do that much, and I didn't dislike. I was actually studying nuclear engineering. There were some things that were just hard for me to study because I wasn't as interested in them. Like if I really forced myself, I could spend the hours in the library, but I wasn't enjoying it. And then I took a really good marketing class at Michigan, which got me interested. But it was I switched over in undergrad. It always looks a little out of my on my resume because it's a general studies degree, but
Okay.
it allowed me to get out of the university in 4 years with an accounting concentration, which I wanted to get a job, which is why I did the accounting concentration. So I worked for General Motors as an accountant for a while. While I was doing that, I'd already planned that I was going to do an MBA and concentrate in marketing. And during the MBA, I just got pretty fascinated by the research. Although I switched over in the auto industry to working part-time in market analysis. And I was just really fascinated by the research, but it dawned on me that in academia, I've got a soft spot for industry, and there's still a managerial bent to a lot of my research compared to, I would say, a lot of scholars. That said, I realized that I would be able to kind of set my agenda. And some of the stuff I did at General Motors was fascinating, like with perceptual maps and whatnot, and some engine choice modeling. But like how many, like the 10th year in a row that you're doing the same perceptual mapping procedure. I was just wondering how exciting that would be. Although I don't mean for those that stay in industry, those that get promoted, are probably doing new and exciting things. But I was just fascinated by the research side of it, and I always like I always like the idea of teaching, as well. But like a lot of academics, I mean, I have to admit, it was really the interest in research that drove it.
Yeah. So because you had that inquisitive mind, you didn't want to do repetitive things. And it seems like you didn't want to kind of stagnate, and you sort of, it wasn't that you were at General Motors for 10 years. You kind of pictured what your life would be in 10 years. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I think I only worked at General Motors for, parts of 4 years. I was working while I was doing my MBA, so some of that overlap, but that's exactly right. So it's nice to think of it this way because, I thought of it a little bit embarrassing as an undergrad, not knowing although I know a lot of people don't, but not figuring out what I wanted to do
Yeah.
right away. And I always had really good stat skills. But if I intellectually, probably a weakness of mine is some of the abstract reasoning. And luckily, abstract reasoning doesn't come into play as much in business schools, I would say.
Yeah,
With
absolutely. So you moved from engineering to sort of a business then, and then through the MBA. Is have I followed that correctly? And that,
that's right.
and that was University of Michigan.
I did my MBA at Michigan State University, which technically is
Okay.
a rival school.
Yeah.
Although I think those of us in academia just know that they're, rival schools are usually all good places to work, if you're an academic. But I'd been working for the Oldsmobile division of General Motors, which no longer exists, but I won't take responsibility for that. But it's funny because since I brought up perceptual maps, you could see at that time that General Motors at that time was really dominated by people with finance backgrounds. And on those positioning maps, it was readily apparent that Oldsmobile and Buick were just overlapping way too much. And I have to say, those of us in market analysis at that time could see it coming. And a big part of it was the vehicles that Buick and Oldsmobile offered were just way too similar. They tried to market Oldsmobile to younger consumers, with a couple of flashy ad campaigns. But the problem was the product was just not geared towards younger consumers, and it didn't work. And then over time, they just got rid of, division that had existed for about 100 years, I think.
Wow. So yeah, both universities in Michigan, and then GM, I'm guessing, was in Detroit, Michigan as well. Is that because that's kind of the car building hub of America, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And other cities in Michigan. So, like when I worked for Oldsmobile, it was in Lansing, where Michigan State is. But I did work a nice stint down at the GM building in Detroit, where they did fancier. There was a group that did fancier analysis, like I said, engine choice modeling, and it was kind of fun stuff because it was, in those old days, and I hope it never happens again. But there were like energy crises where gas prices skyrocketed, and management was really interested. Well, are people really going to switch down from like more fuel efficient
Mm.
engines? If they had 8-cylinder engines, would they trade down to 6-cylinder engines? To save money on gas. So it really was fun stuff to work on.
Yeah, at the time, was the fuel price sort of crisis kind of what it was at the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war, when, obviously supply chains got disrupted and a lot of energy comes out of Europe. Was it similar to that? And I suppose the mirror today is, were people going to move to electric vehicles in response rather than
Yeah.
maybe downgrade their cylinder?
I think you're exactly right. I mean, those were the so-called energy crises in the U.S. There were two major ones, were primarily politically driven.
Yeah.
Relations between the U.S. and Middle Eastern nations very much have gone up and down, and and it can vary by Middle Eastern nation as well. But that's exactly what happened back then. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with EVs going forward, because I don't think there's any doubt that they're the wave of the future. But you get things like studies coming out showing that the damage to the environment from the types of tires they use is worse than from the internal combustion engine. But as the technology gets better, Zach, um, there's just no doubt that in terms of sustainability, it has to go that way. But I also hope we see, it's funny how you hear about all these innovations, and this was definitely the case with internet advertising and now metaverse. But a lot of times perfecting the technology just takes a lot longer. We know it's coming, but it takes a lot longer. I mean, driverless cars would be wonderful, because the number of people that die in traffic accidents every year, it would be fantastic to take that out of the equation. But there's some of that going on, but it's just not perfected yet.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. As someone with a newborn at home, I've already envisioned him driving his own car. And as much as, I enjoy driving a car, like it petrifies me of the sort of risks that are involved, not just for his level of skill, but other people's on the road as well. And just freak accidents, like to do with weather conditions. So
Yeah,
I'm kind of hoping that in about 16 years' time, it's a little bit more automated in some way.
yeah.
um,
Let's hope. Yeah.
we have a really interesting situation in Australia, because we haven't had a car manufacturing hub here for quite a long time. We used to have Mitsubishi building cars here. General Motors had Holdens building cars here, you may remember.
I do.
And we
Yeah.
also had Ford building in Australia as well. And so as a result, we had a lot of tariffs from importing cars. So European or Asian cars used to be pretty expensive to not only buy, but then to service as a result. But because they're no longer here, it's no longer affordable to manufacture cars here because of wages and energy prices. We now have a lot of cars coming from, originally it was coming from Europe with the likes of Volkswagen, and then
Mhm.
coming from places like Korea and Japan with Mitsubishi and Hyundai and Kia. But now we're seeing a real big influx of Chinese EVs. And a lot cheaper than you're seeing in Europe and America, where they still have manufacturing for vehicles and are
Mhm.
trying to protect those industries. Do you have any more insights onto that one?
No, I mean, I think that's really interesting. But yeah, whenever there's efforts to protect industries, whether it's a tariff or some other,
Mhm.
trade barrier. I mean, it does lead to a cost to the consumer. There's just no question about it. And a lot of discussion over this right now because, the new President Trump, he likes to use tariff threats as a negotiating ploy. And I think everybody hopes that it is just a negotiating, ploy. It seems to be his history that if it starts impacting the stock market, he tends to back off. I mean, he is at his core a business person. So time will tell though. But those of us that teach global marketing courses, we don't like tariffs very much.
No, and when he did first threaten the 25% tariff on Mexico and Canada to the South and North of America, I think it was the next day the S&P 500 dropped by about 2% or something like that, which sounds really bad, and it is. But people who follow finance realize these short-term bumps happen all of the time and see it as a bit of a buying opportunity.
Yeah.
I know I sort of looked at it and thought, I don't need to sell this till I'm hopefully if I make it to my 70s. So yeah, I didn't worry too bad. So did you pick Michigan for any particular reason? Did you grow up in Michigan or did you move there for the universities? I know people in America tend to move states and away from their homes and families to study, right?
Yeah, in a lot of cases, but it is. I think it's somewhat interesting, the story, because I grew up in Michigan, and like you mentioned, it was, especially at that time, it was such an automotive hub that like everybody's parents, everybody had people in their families like working in the auto industry. And basically in the US university system, I'd gotten admitted to MIT, and I initially thought I was going to go there, but then I thought about the impact on my parents because they were going to pay my tuition, and it was about 4 times more as the in-state tuition at University of Michigan, which
Whoa.
has an excellent engineering program as well. And then, simultaneously, a few of my friends from high school decided to go to Michigan, so that was comforting. But there's something, for American young people that do decide, to go somewhere else. It is kind of nice to expand your horizons. So I definitely see the argument, but it was a lot of it was just feeling that Michigan was a really good option, and not wanting my parents having to spend so much more for what I thought would be. MIT is a great school, but what I thought would be roughly similar educations anyway.
Yeah, and I guess it kind of panned out a little bit because you then transferred a bit more to and went more towards like a business degree. And I'm not sure how big MIT are. They're mostly known for their engineering school, right?
I think they're graduate business schools. Sloan is
Okay.
really good, but it's not. I don't think they specialize in it at the
Yeah.
undergrad level. Yeah, so I wouldn't. So it's a good point. It might have been a very different path.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe like one of those sliding door moments there where you're like, what am I going to do? We might not be having this conversation. So you were, for a period of time, the president of the American Academy of Advertising. Being an Australian, I'm not super aware of that one. Is it connected to a conference? How does that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, there's an annual conference, but it's been around quite a while. I think since 1960, and it's kind of a combination of people that study advertising. More recently, it's gotten much more internationalized than it was. When it started out, it was definitely a place where people in the big advertising programs in journalism communication colleges, like schools like Texas or Northwestern or Michigan State or Florida. Not every school has an advertising department, but several big ones. Illinois is another one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
Have really good ones, and they'll have a critical mass of faculty that study advertising, whereas in business schools and marketing departments, kind of like it's the case here at Villanova, really only myself and one of my colleagues, Tyler Milfeld, specialize, in advertising. But it's kind of a nice mix of people with communications and marketing backgrounds. and the annual conference is really good. And I think the community that studies advertising has really benefited from the European Advertising Academy. About 25 years ago, I think, started running this Icoria conference, and it's gotten really well established, and I think it's pretty much on par or a peer with the American Academy of Advertising meeting now. But what's wonderful is more people go back and forth between the two conferences. I wish something like that would evolve in Asia. There's been a few really good people that have made attempts to host like one-time, conferences. It's difficult to start an organization. They're both pretty purely academic, although at American Academy of Advertising, a lot of the membership has industry connections. So some industry people will come and speak at the conference.
Yeah, what would you say the attendance is like? A high number or?
Yeah, it's typically a smaller conference than like EMAC or American Marketing Association would be because it's focused. But I think it's gotten up to close to 300 people a year, yeah, or maybe a little more. But it keeps kind of that smaller group feeling, I think, compared to American Marketing Association. Although I have to confess, it's really kind of funny because for some years I wasn't going to American Marketing Association like I had earlier in my career, and people would ask me why, and I said, well, the good people in advertising are presenting at American Academy of Advertising. But in the meantime, over the last few years, Colin Campbell, who and you told me did one of these podcasts, he's single-handedly started to organize sessions, built up an interest group there that's making it, have a better advertising presence. Although I have to say, Colin also goes to the American Academy of Advertising. As Journal of Advertising research editor, he has to. So
Yeah, he's doing a wonderful job at Journal of Advertising Research. Yeah.
and incredible, I would say. Yeah.
He's got for those, I'm quite happy to plug his podcast as well. So the Journal of Advertising Research, just on Spotify, I think it is. I don't think it's on the Apple podcast platform. Yeah, feel free to subscribe to that. So he brings on authors to talk about their latest articles, which is pretty cool. So this conference, I kind of agree with you in some sense that the smaller conferences feel kind of nice because they even with a few hundred people, with the size of conference venues, they have an intimate kind of feeling about it. You can quite quickly find people that you're looking for, make connections that you hadn't had, catch up with colleagues that you haven't seen for a year, and build those relationships. And you do tend to find, there's naturally going to be churn where there's new people one year, other people have missed out. But you do find that over, continuously going for a conference, you find the same names and faces every year, and you do build that sort of collegiality with people you would never see or meet before, which I think is kind of nice, versus those sort of 1,000 people conferences. Be really interesting if something like this actually did have a bit of a place in Asia. Be really good, or whether there could be like a guest year in Australia. So the Marketing Science Conference is primarily based in the US, but they were hosted by University of New South Wales in Sydney last year. And it was the first time they'd been there in 25 years, I think it was. And it was their third highest ever attendance. So it might be worth Icora or one of the other American Academy of Advertising conference, maybe doing a guest spot or like a guest year in Australia or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. They've done some of that in the past, and I think Gail Kerr hosted one year, and I think everybody really enjoyed it. I think the time's more ripe now for having that kind of international conference, because I think earlier in the history of American Academy of Advertising, like it was an international trip like that, they kind of would have to accept like everything that was submitted, to get critical mass.
Yeah.
But I think there would be more interest now between the two groups, plus scholars, and a good number, especially in the U.S., but in Europe as well. Like a good number of the advertising scholars did grow up and do their undergrad degree in Asia, in Korea, Japan, China. So I mean, I really think that would be a great idea.
Mm. And especially for emerging marketers, whether they're PhDs, still looking to get into the job market and getting feedback on their thesis and their research, or whether they're ECRs who typically have maybe smaller budgets, don't have access to the allocation of funds in their unit. It makes it a lot cheaper. So if marketing science didn't come to Sydney, I would never have attended one of their conferences because it's a massive time zone. It's a huge
Yeah.
in actually life allocation to spend time there, and budgetary things. So I think it definitely opens up the conference to new people, and allows them to experience it, which I'm grateful that it came to Sydney. I really am. So you were the president there for a while, which must have been pretty cool. One of the other things that you'd done was you were a member of the council for the World Certificate Institute. Now you've been doing that for 10 years. I'm not quite sure what they do there. They accredit. You accrediting other courses from other universities. Is it kind of like a Equus type of situation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's terribly exciting. It has to do with accreditation, but there's good people. There's good people involved in it, and they would put out some rankings as well.
And so is specific courses? Is that so you would evaluate other marketing courses or other programs or?
Yeah, that's right. And on more of a global basis, here, well, what's more worldwide now, but ACSB, accredits business schools, kind of some similarity with that.
Cool. So we can talk about your actual academic career, which I think is really fascinating. So you finished your PhD, and you became an assistant professor at Villanova University, where you were promoted twice into associate professor and then a full professor. All of that within about 12 years, which is remarkably quick for people who are not in academia. That's very, very impressive. So you got your role outside of just after you finished your PhD. Do you remember what that process was like for you? Did you have connections there? Was it a university that had advertised? Was there a specific reason you wanted to go to that university? Does any sort of thing there?
Yeah, well, back then when I came out, like about 30 years ago, like almost all placement was through the American Marketing Association summer conference.
Okay.
So the schools would all interview there. And to be honest, I came out in a particularly bad year in the job market. They were tough economic times. And I don't think there were like as many retirements for a few years, owing to whatever. So I was really, there were some years where the market was so good that like people coming out of the university that I did, they'd have to, they could get 30 interviews if they wanted at American Marketing Association. But in the year I came out, like if you could get like 10 interviews, that was good. And, so I interviewed and I had offers at a couple of other places, including one big state school. But at the time I had a spouse who was also going to be graduating the next year, and this state school was like in a remote location where there were no other, universities. But the bottom line is, Villanova had some active scholars here, including a guy named Ron Hill, who's now at American University, well known in the transformative community, or the TCR, transformative consumer research community, and he was still young and doing really good things, and he was helpful in introducing me to people. And early on, I got really interested in the public policy and marketing group that American Marketing Association runs, which led to like later on, writing on legal issues in marketing. And it's led to a lot of ability to do expert witness work, in the U.S. But Ron Hill was a department chair, and he was really supportive, and active, and he was really good at introducing me to, people in his network, and kind of learn from that. To try to with our junior scholars, I really try to do my best, to help. Academic networks really are very important.
I think a lot more important than people realize. Because you can, all things being equal, like that connection you have with people and the relationship you have with people. I mean, from a marketing perspective, like that mental availability you have with people is could be the difference between, you know, you being hired or someone else being hired. Yeah. So is it still like that at AMA? Is it still a bit of a, because I've never been, is it still like that at the summer conferences where it's a bit of a meat market, a bit of a job application?
I think it's changed. So some of it still goes on,
Yeah.
but COVID really changed things. And I think, I've had some people tell me too that just for a long time, these interviews were just held, like in hotel rooms, and it would become awkward if you had a male interviewing a female in a closed hotel room. So there are a couple of good reasons to switch. I know our most recent hires at Villanova, we haven't even went to AMA. We've done the first round interviews on Zoom and then invited people to campus. But I think some of that still goes on. And, and there's a lot of really good people that go to AMA. So I certainly wouldn't discourage anybody from going there and taking advantage of like a good number of people being there. But I think technology has just changed such that it's not as essential for a school to have to go there to be able to interview really whoever they want.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Zoom has absolutely changed the dynamics of a lot of different things. I remember when, working for the Institute and connecting with sponsors in the US or Europe or anyone who's not in the physical state that I'm in, we were using like Skype for business and the old WebEx, and it was absolutely unreliable, grainy, dropped out all of the time. And we used to do rehearsals with it the day before with like just the key contact, and it would work. And then the day of, you do everything the same, and it would just fall apart. So, I mean, COVID obviously had a lot of disastrous effects, but that was one of the better ones, that's for sure. Yeah, we kind of have a similar thing in terms of I don't think we scout people at conferences like ANZMAC, for example, which is the big conference in maybe Australia and New Zealand. I think we get roughly about 500 attendees, so it's nowhere near as big as Marketing Science or AMA or EMAC. But like I said, I kind of like that intimate kind of feel. Yeah, there's no sort of job scouting for what I can tell. I think some supervisors may be introducing late stage PhD candidates to networks, but it's not like a formal process. From what I'm aware of, there's been no interviews in hotel rooms or anything like that. So this is all very new to me.
Yeah, I do, Zach, hope to make it to ANZMAC sometime. For Americans, it's just a very tough time of the year because it's the end of our semester and then it's kind of up against the Christmas holiday. And if you come to, as I'm sure you're aware, for a lot of Americans, Australia is an extremely attractive, place to visit. So people like the idea of going there, but I've heard nothing but great things about ANZMAC. And sometime, maybe next sabbatical, I'll have to make a point.
The next two ANZMAC, so 2025 is Macquarie University. So I think that's just outside of the Sydney CBD, and then it's Auckland, which is in New Zealand. We don't know the ones after that yet; they haven't been announced. But New Zealand is stunning. Like it's just absolutely. If you love nature, and you get outside of the cities, it's a treat. So you landed the assistant professor role, got promoted to associate professor. What was the promotion process kind of like for you? Was it submitting formal documents? Were there interviews? Was it extraordinarily stressful? And like, I mean, the couple that I've gone through, the first one unsuccessful. It takes its toll on you, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting, Zach, because one thing that worked out really well for me about coming to Villanova, and they've always treated me, really well here, and I think appreciated what I did. But we're like a medium size. We're a private school with. I don't even want to tell you what the tuition is. It's so crazy, from the worldwide standpoint. But our class sizes are smaller, yet our teaching loads are really reasonable. For most people that are active in research, it's 4 courses a year, but I even get a reduction beyond that from being an endowed chair and journal editor. But unlike some of the large state schools or like the most elite private schools, there isn't so much that A+ journal obsession here. So Villanova would, would give me credit for publishing regularly in journals like the Journal of Advertising or the Journal of Advertising Research, or even something like JAMS. Some of the biggest schools in the US, even though it's a great journal, don't give people credit on the way to tenure. So I think going in, it's important to know what you like to do. And as I mentioned, and that's one thing, that's one reason I really admire what your group does at Ehrenberg Bass is, because I worked for industry for a while, I was always interested in topics that, that a manager can read the article and get something out of it in the relatively short term. And I don't mean that as a knock on anybody doing more basic theoretical research. But when you look at, JM, JMR, and JCR, if you're focusing on managerial relevance, you're, the percentage of articles that have that slant, I think, are relatively limited. So I was fortunate I was at a place, that recognizes really good. I don't know it's interesting because when I testify in court, the U.S. courts, if it's an advertising case, they probably think it's more impressive to be in the Journal of Advertising than the Journal of Marketing, just because it's an advertising case. Or, I'm fortunate to do a lot of media, as I'm sure we'll get to, especially around the Super Bowl. And once again, the people in the media just want to see good papers and good research. And I don't mean to suggest that publishing in very high quality journals isn't important, but it was right for me to have more options. I think I would have had to modify what I wanted to research to try to be a regular in JM, JMR, and JCR. I mean, I took a different pattern, and I don't know how many I've published in JA, but probably something on the order of 15 to 20. But that's where I wanted to send a lot of my best work, and in doing that, you can definitely, establish a reputation in a certain area. And in some I don't mean this the wrong way, but in some respects, certainly there's some people at Ehrenberg Bass that can relate to this. I'm because of doing managerially focused research, I'm able to do more consulting and more media as well. So it's worked well for me. I don't mean to suggest, I certainly admire people, anybody that's had a career where they've published 5 or more of those A-star journals. Hats off to them.
Yeah, they're notoriously difficult to get into. Yeah,
Bordering on impossible, right? For
no,
most people.
we have a very similar situation in Australia where some of the group of 8, so the old sort of sandstone universities scattered throughout each state, their focus is quite often on what we'd refer to them as A stars, so the real top tier, the JMs, JCRs, those sorts of things. Everyone else is usually, for us, focused on A's or above, so Australasian Marketing Journal or Journal of Consumer Behavior, Journal of Advertising Research, International Journal of Advertising, those sorts of things. And I'm very thankful that, I did a PhD and got the role at the University of South Australia where it did open up those options, because I think it allowed me to get those runs on the board early on in the career, which is important. And then, build that confidence. I mean, I'd like to publish in one of those top journals, and I'll still send some of my work there. But it's not a career make or break for me, luckily, at this point. Who knows what will happen after the merger, but at this point, I'm okay. But from what I'm hearing from you, though, is you seem to be, so when you moved from assistant to associate and then full professor, for you it was, I want to build this narrative, I want to build this reputation around being an expert in advertising, and the university that you're at allowed you to do that because it had a wider scope of journals that you could publish your work in and valued that media outlet and that consultation. So is that kind of your route to those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think so. And like I said, I think I was lucky because I easily could have went the route of going to a school that like when I went up for tenure would only value those A stars. And if that was the case, I really would have had to modify I wouldn't have had to do stuff I was totally disinterested in. But I don't think I could have set for me my own research agenda. I'm really interested in like what makes advertising effective, for example. But I mean, if you look at a typical year of journal of marketing, I mean, how many papers do they publish on advertising? And that's not that it's impossible. Journal marketing's positioning is just very much on a strategic level. And I think sometimes the tendency is to view advertising as a tactic, and it's a pretty big hurdle for a paper on advertising to take the perspective uh, of the holistic strategy, of the organization. So understandably, um, I say that about advertising, but I'm sure people that do retailing research, new product development would be able to say this, like the same type of thing. And again, it's not a knock on those journals, but it's good for people to know that there's other paths. And I should say, Zach, you know, I did nonetheless have to, there's still pretty rigorous standards. At the time I came up, I think you probably needed something like 8 articles in pretty good, in pretty good journals, like on the Australia New Zealand list, which actually I think it's the best list in the world, personally. But you probably back then would have needed at least 4 A's and 4 B's, or you know what I mean, some combination like that. So there definitely was pressure to publish, but luckily I was doing well, and especially in the department had supportive colleagues. But I still had to dot the I's and cross the T's on a massive binder that was my tenure packet. But it's one thing when you make full professor, it's just so nice. I mean, I don't even like filling out activity reports or updating my resume, just because I'd rather produce, than
Yeah.
track the production.
Yeah.
Um, but because people were pretty supportive, I mean, there's still some stress. And even when you're doing well, you're still junior in the organization, and you have to listen to what the senior people say, which fortunately for me, most of those senior people had my best interests at heart, but that's not always the case either.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh, I kind of agree with you. I mean, I just had my performance review yesterday. No, 2 days ago. By the time this gets released, it would be a while. But yeah, it took me probably all of a day and a half, so probably 10 hours to compile everything that I did from the previous 12 months and then outline what I plan to do for the following 12 months. And, I'm a big believer in planning, and I'm a very, by nature, reflective sort of person. So I find it sort of somewhat useful. But the amount of time that it involves, and you're trying to produce other things, whether it's new teaching materials or review articles or write your own research, it's pretty big. And the other reason I think I kind of get something out of it is because being a senior lecturer, I still need 2 more promotions before I sort of hit that professor mark. And so, I mean, I have to document this stuff anyway, and it's becoming more and more documented from what I can tell is everything you do has to be measured and objective metrics, and where's your evidence, and internal achievements, external achievements, domestic achievements, international achievements. I feel like the bar just keeps rising and rising and rising. So it's a very difficult process, the promotion, that's for sure. So you had a binder to get tenure, is that right?
Yeah. Back then it would actually be put in a physical binder too. But we should never lose sight of the fact, Zach, even though we go through these things, for most of us that go, for me, I wouldn't trade academia for
Yeah.
anything. The opportunity to make friends around the world, work with really bright people, teach, communicate what you know to young people, and knowing, being able to become an expert on topics. It's funny because, like most academics, I'm fundamentally more introverted. And like when I do the media, part of me really doesn't love the attention, but there's another part of me that really likes being thought of as an expert on something, because I've worked hard, I've worked hard to get there. And there is something really cool about feeling that you're an expert on a topic.
Yeah. It's no, I agree with you. I don't think I would change either. People ask me like, how would you describe your day? And I say my job involves being criticized and criticizing others. Is a good chunk of what you do day to day. Ultimately, it's about that creation and dissemination of knowledge, which is very, very rewarding. But because of that criticism, you can have those sort of off days where you're like, oh, my paper got rejected, the reviewers didn't like it, or student evaluations come back and you have overwhelming majority of really nice things that have been said, and then you get one comment, you're like, oh, for some reason that one comment hurts. But then, you a couple of days go by, and then you do tend to reflect and think to yourself, this is actually such a rewarding career. Like, how many people get to spend their lives, as you said, becoming the expert in a particular topic and being seen and have that reputation. So, yeah, no, I very much resonate with what you just said. So the title that you have is the John A. Murphy Professor of Marketing. For those of us who don't know, what is this named position?
Yeah, in the States, it's very common for loyal alumni to donate money to the university to support a professorship.
Okay.
And I think at the time Murphy made the donation, it was like $1 million, years ago. Now I think it's like at least 2 million. But some of that donation, obviously the university invests the money and it grows, but some of that money goes back to supporting, the chairholder. Unfortunately, in practice, most universities manage to keep a lot of it in the general fund. So we always wish we had more support, for collecting data and stuff. But I do get some extra budget, as a result of being the chair.
Oh,
And Murphy yeah, and John Murphy, he was a Villanova undergrad that sent some of his kids and grandkids to Villanova. So he was real loyal. But he did a Harvard MBA, and he went on to make his name in marketing. And he was a brand manager and then vice president at Miller Brewing. So he was really credited as being behind that famous "less filling tastes great" campaign that I think is regarded as one of the best of all time in the U.S. because it's almost impossible to believe this now for somebody younger. But light beer originally had the reputation as something that was more of a woman's drink, like saving calories, whereas beer was, regular beer was like more manly back then. But they use famous athletes and stress that it tastes great, and it's less filling. But they had these manly images of athletes in there, and its market share took off. And then he later, Miller Brewing was acquired by Philip Morris, the tobacco company. So Murphy actually became chairman of the board. And to his credit, he started obviously a very controversial product category, but he did start some social responsibility, programs while he was at Philip Morris.
yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad that there's a connection back to marketing in the university. Is it considered prestigious to have, coming from a non-American background, is it prestigious to have a chaired title sort of a position at a university?
It is, and it's to me, it's kind of like the ultimate position. I mean, some people that can handle administration might think of a dean's job as being, more prestigious, and now they're endowing some of the deanships as well. But I think the dean's job is so difficult. I'm happy to stay miles away from any of that kind of stuff. Uh, uh,
I have to say, I've noticed that a lot of people, yeah, they kind of figure out when they enter academia, they suss out the various positions, and there is more than one career path, absolutely. And some people really want those sort of, admin sort of jobs and people management jobs. Other people just want to be kind of somewhat, I'm very good at what I want to do, and I just want to keep doing this and growing and passing on that knowledge. So another
but
one.
it's it. But
Sorry.
Zach, I would say, back to something you said before about the review process. There's just no doubt that review processes are brutal.
Yeah.
And over time, you just have to be, especially once you publish more, you've really demonstrated that you're good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're a real good example at your career stage. You published some really good articles,
Oh, thank
and the review process can be quirky and no research is perfect. But I think fundamentally, if you maintain that confidence and work real hard, there's no way around it. To be a really successful academic, you have to work a lot of hours. This old myth of the professor having summers off is ridiculous. You know what I mean? I feel like I've worked more hours through my whole career than most business managers. It's probably on a level with most elite executives. But if that's what you want to do, it does pay off. I mean, putting in the work and having confidence. But it's easy. It's easy when people write reviews like this is one of the worst things I've read in years. You know what I mean? To take that personally. But over time, I will say more. Um, I'm lucky to have been pretty successful in the end, but I recall very few journal articles that weren't a battle. You know what I mean? All the way through. Now and then you'll get a review that's really positive, but to get 3 reviews that's really positive just doesn't happen. So it can be character building, and I don't know. I feel kind of lucky that I built confidence in that respect relatively early on in my career. And I think once you do, I don't know if saying it gets easier is the right way to put it because every one of them is a battle, but you get more experienced on the learning curve and you get better at choosing co-authors and working more efficiently. So I think it gets better, but I don't like to see when people lose confidence because of the review process, because we really lose some great scholars doing good work to it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you can kind of, I think that empathy when you're a reviewer comes in really, really handy. How would I perceive this if someone wrote this about my work? And people are not putting, well, I'd like to hope people are not putting forward something that they think is half finished or, they're putting forward their best effort. And your role as a reviewer, if there's no fundamental issues with it, in which case you can point them out and help them address it for the next time they submit it, but is to try to help them improve their paper. I think some people forget that sometimes the role of the reviewer is acting like a silent co-author where you're encouraging them and saying, here, like that's the way I like to review anyways, tweak this, add this, and then the way I try to think of it is if it's worth pursuing, would it get up into 3 rounds of reviews? Is it manageable by them? But also thinking, I was reviewing a paper the other day. The structure of the paper, it looked like it had been somewhat copied and pasted out of a thesis, right? Just in terms of some of the weird quirks that had happened there. It was written for a journal, but yeah, there's some quirks there. And I thought to myself, I'm not going, and I don't do this anyway, but I thought to myself, my role as this reviewer here is this paper's not going to go through to the next round of reviews, but to put myself in the shoes of this poor young undergraduate student who maybe hasn't had great supervision at the time, and to really help them so that they can go away for another month or two, rewrite the structure, put their arguments a slightly different way, and to help them get a better shot at making it in academia. I took that view. Like, I had to reject the paper, which I don't like doing, but I still wanted them to not lose the hope that you were saying and to see from their perspective and their experience to keep them going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think your experience as an associate editor helps too because you get to see the process holistically, and I think a lot of editors really, boy, I really do try to, you're rejecting a whole lot of papers, um, but I try to make it as humane as possible. Although I think the volume has gotten so much
Yeah.
that that it's hard to manage it as well as we should, and I don't really take time to write to individual reviewers unless something blatant happens. But your attitude is like the dream scenario. Although there are a good number of really good people that do take that approach, but there's others, and I think we all have to watch ourselves too when we review. If you happen to be in a bad mood that day, say you got your own paper that you had high hopes for rejected on the same day,
Yeah.
you've got to try to separate that. But I love that idea. It's just I wish every reviewer was like that, and we all should remember that at times. I think we all that in some ways, like interactions between spouses, we all have chords that can be struck. You know what I mean? And we've got
Yeah.
to be careful about not overreacting.
Yeah. And I think for those who have reviewed, I think the ability to paste 2 different things is very useful. Like, so you should write the very empathetic, kind version of the review there. And you shouldn't be then horrible to the, the confidential note to the associate editor and editor, but just provide that little more casual understanding. And I quite often, and I think that's what I wrote in this recent review is, look, the paper's not of this journal's quality, and the editor does know who it is. I, as a reviewer, wouldn't. And I think I wrote something like, I actually think that this is a young PhD student, maybe trying to publish during it. I've tried to frame, and I've tried to give the editor insights as to my viewing or the way I perceived the authors and the context in which I wrote the review, which I found very, very useful when I'm the associate editor and I'm processing these myself, is if people copy and paste the same comments in the confidential one to the authors, it's like, that doesn't actually help me. Like, provide the really useful stuff for the reviewers and then provide me the context so then I can interpret what you've written from your, I don't know, I find that so much more useful.
That's right. I agree.
So you have an absolutely awesome journal, so the International Journal of Advertising. And you've been the editor-in-chief there since 2008, and you've seen 2 different publishing houses, which is pretty kind of cool. How's the journal doing as a holistic view?
Yeah, it's doing really well, Zach, and I'm pleased to report. But it's submissions have really been skyrocketing. So, but it seems like in those early years we were getting like 250 submissions or so, and then it gradually went up. And about 5 years ago, it got to more than one a day, and now last year I think we ended up with 630 something. And
Wow.
I'm at a little bit of an inflection point right now because I'm the editor in chief, and thank goodness, I've got senior associate editors helping me out. But like, I used to pride myself on reading every paper that came in, and I just can't do it anymore. It's just that both of the last 2 days, one of them 6 papers came in and another 7 came in. So I wouldn't be surprised if it goes up to 750 or something like that this year. So it has to become very much a team effort. But we benefited. My predecessor all those years ago, Doug West, got the journal in SSCI. And as a result of that, along with the Journal of Advertising and the Journal of Advertising Research, among those in the ad community, it's pretty universally regarded as one of the top 3 advertising journals. And we've always had a special relationship because Journal of Advertising is an American Academy of Advertising journal, and Journal of Advertising Research is owned by the ARF, the Advertising Research Foundation out of New York. There was an opening for IJA, which is owned by the Advertising Association of the United Kingdom, based in London. There was this opening, to have this special relationship with the ICORIA group. But I really have made significant efforts to really be truly more global. Although the Journal of Advertising and Journal of Advertising Research have also done really good things in this regard. But I've done more things like Emerging Markets Conference Board, where I was in India, in December, and it's been in South Africa and Slovenia and other places in the past, and kind of on a country by country basis sometimes where there's interest. I make sure, like if ICORIA is in Greece, I really try to recruit good people in Greece to become associate editors, and it's kind of paid off. We got ranked as the top advertising journal in France, and I've heard like a perceptual ranking, and I've heard that's the case in Italy as well. But it's important to me that authors from everywhere feel like some affinity with the journal, and that it's a good place to publish, and we'll keep doing that. So but if anyone listening to this podcast, as an academic with your PhD, and you're interested in reviewing or becoming more active, it's a good problem, all these submissions, but my task has to become being more of a manager, of the process. Otherwise things, I've got to make sure that the senior AEs and AEs are doing consistent things. and this type of thing. But we wanted, very much want involvement, from all over the world, and keep it on that. I'm a big fan of Journal of Advertising Research, especially what Colin has done since he took over, and also the Journal of Advertising as well. Because I can't publish in the journal that I edit, those other two outlets are places where I really value the ability to submit manuscripts.
Really, a lot of stuff to unpack there. So you said you just over 2 papers a day at the moment, roughly, and you're expecting that to continue to go up. What was it like in 2008? Were you getting like 50 papers a year, like once a week? And
Yeah, I think it was more in the 200s
okay,
back then. Yeah, I don't. It'd be interesting what Duck West would say about that before SSCI. But SSCI is just kind of, I think globally, it's just a mark of excellence for a journal. And I don't mean to suggest that there's some really good journals that aren't in SSCI, but because they haven't expanded it all that much, journals that are in SSCI, have a real advantage in attracting submissions.
yeah,
I think, and I do appreciate the Australia, New Zealand Dean's List, because I really think the British list has just gotten completely. It's not so bad on the high end, but they don't move journals based on objective metrics, and they really underrate some journals. Fortunately, for that reason, I think in most countries outside of the UK, it's losing influence. There's a few exceptions, like I think it's still important in Sweden, and we're a little bit. It's the only list I feel like IJA is underrated. Although I've definitely made some efforts to be present at conferences in the UK. We're making some strides on people knowing that it's a good journal.
yeah. I 100% agree with you that the ABS list from the UK, it rarely moves, and I think it actually restricts where their academics are incentivized to publish, which means that it's very difficult for them to publish with international colleagues. Like I've had co-authors before, and it really hampers where your discussions go as to where will this piece find a home. So if you aim for some of those, higher ranked journals for them, and you get knocked back for whatever reason, what options do you have left? Like none, because they're actively discouraged from publishing there.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
I think I think I think it should change because yeah, for those reasons, it's not reflective of what's actually happening, how people perceive those journals, and then it limits their own academics in that collaboration space.
I went to the Academy Marketing meeting, and I did hear that even ABS, or I guess it's AJG now they call it, put out a statement that other criteria should be used as well. But but my sense, I'll be say something a little controversial here, but I've always felt that that's a management dominated list, and like if advertising had its own list, IJA would have to be a 4 or a 4-star, but because it doesn't, they can rate it anywhere, it's where management has got like business history and organizational behavior, operations. They're all separate lists, these sub areas. So, um, but anyways, all of that is to say, I'm grateful for the Australia, New Zealand list, which is thought. I mean, the criticism of some at least universities of Australia, New Zealand list is that they think that it's too easy. But I would really take somebody to task on that. It's not too easy there when if you look at the rejection rates of the A journals, on that list, they're all really difficult to get into. I think it just allows for a lot of good papers to be published, like you said, by international teams, and
And those rankings do matter for the level of submissions. So places like the Journal of Consumer Behavior, International Journal of Market Research, and Australasian Marketing Journal, all three were Bs. And I think it was in 2019 they got moved up to A. And they all subsequently seen a big spike in public or people submitting their work there from the universities that rely on that list. And I know it's one of the big focuses of Liam Nguyen, from UNSW, who's the current editor of AMJ. He's got one more year left. Was to get into, there's a Chinese-based version of this list, which I'm not fully across, but his big hope is to get AMJ sort of nudged into that next bracket, and
Nice.
that will spur on the next growth. So, I mean, you were saying, your role in IJA, given how many publications you have, has moved from I need to read every paper and handle every paper to, that big oversight. And so I think that's kind of what Liam might be doing as well.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, it's a huge team effort. How many people do you have on your senior associate editors, and what's their role within the journal?
Yeah, I've just added 2 senior associate editors. I've had 5, but I felt like I was just really overloading them with the increase in submissions. So two are being added. One's already in the. You get these quirks. The other one, she's an associate editor, and we've got a thing in the system where it's difficult to make her a senior associate editor because of the other papers in progress. That we'll straighten that out. But anyway, so that'll give us 7. And I'm thinking it's interesting that you mentioned getting involved with China, because our submissions are up everywhere, but they're most up in China and India. And early on, when I took it over in 2008, most of the submissions from India, honestly, were getting desk rejected. The quality has consistently risen, and I hope it keeps rising. But not only are more of them getting into the review process, some of them are getting accepted. And in China, we're getting a high volume of really good submissions. So the desk reject rate on Chinese submissions isn't very high, but we don't. We have a limited number of reviewers in China, but I really would like to expand that. And I'm talking to he's Indian by nationality, but he's based in the UK. I'm talking about him to potentially come in as a senior associate editor, but I don't know. To date, I don't have it structured by region. I could potentially consider that if I found the right people, but it would be kind of odd, because right now I've got two of the senior associate editors have a special interest in China. One because she's Chinese ethnically, but works in the United States, and another, Isaac Chia, from Australia. He spends a lot of time in China and has some connections there. So I don't know that I just want one person handling everything from China, but the senior associate editor is essentially, historically, I would read through the paper, decide whether it's desk rejected, assign an associate editor, but recommend some reviewers. Take the time to recommend some reviewers to the associate editors. When I assign it to a senior associate editor, if it's, I do look at it far enough to determine whether it should be desk rejected, at least for now. I mean, say submissions went up to 1,000, you know what I mean? Then I might have to delegate that. But I still have, with desk rejections, when it goes to a senior associate editor, I'll only desk reject it if I don't feel like it deserves a senior associate editor looking at it. If I think it's marginal, I'll still send it on, and then they have the right to recommend desk rejection. But with the senior associate editors, I don't recommend reviewers. I let them do that. And I'm still handling a significant chunk of the papers without going to a senior associate editor. But as the submissions go up, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be able to do as many. As recently as a year and a half ago, I guess really a year ago, I was trying to handle half of them.
Yeah. It's a big workload, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of I don't know if it's part of your decision-making process, but when you do get sent so many papers and you realize that it's a difficult task to recruit reviewers and good quality reviewers and then to get the reviews and resubmissions, that's kind of, do you take the lens of, will I get people interested in this paper to review it, and will it get through that review cycle? Because everyone has a limited pool of reviewers that they can reliably tap on, and you don't want to just send them absolutely everything, because then when you actually need them, they're not going to be there.
Yeah. Well, so far, Zach, although we may be getting to like a crisis point. I've noticed with this latest bump, we've historically had a pretty loyal reviewer base, but the scale's different now. And I am pretty active. To anybody that goes on to be an editor, I would emphasize like how important conferences in the area are, for meeting people and knowing people, and being able to recruit people for reviewers, because they're, when they know me or the senior associate editor or associate editor that's asking them to do the review, there's probably a better chance. And I mean, it doesn't always work, but we've been lucky for having a real loyal reviewer base for a long time. But more and more people are just getting really overtaxed.
Yeah.
And I can, even as an editor, I've remained on some editorial review boards, and for a long time, there is a good bit of editor to editor courtesy, where you don't get asked to do a lot of reviews in a review, but I'm finding that I'm turning down more, kind of similar to what I'm describing. Some of the journals are going more to senior associate editors, and a given senior associate editor, at let's say it's a consumer behavior journal, might not even know that I'm an editor. You know what I mean? So, but I can't accommodate, I can't do, 6 or 8 reviews a year for another journal just because I'm on the editorial review board. So, but we all face this problem, and you're right. We don't want to overload the same people, all the time. So a lot of effort has to be put into, and whenever I'm at meet the editor sessions, I fear it becomes one of those preaching to the choir kind of things, but I stress how valuable it is to the discipline, and I feel like I learned a lot from reviewing. But I don't know, there are some people out there now that just don't think it's worth their time, and we've got to really try to fight to not overload people so much, that it does really work against them rather than for them. And realistically, you can't take into account as an editor whether somebody reviews for you, or not, because you're enforcing a quality standard. But that is sometimes part of me wishes I could, because it's such a valuable service, to the discipline.
Yeah, and like Web of Science tracks verified numbers of publications from, reviews from journals, and I put that in some of the stuff that I document, as we were talking about before, with promotion applications and stuff, just to show that you're contributing to your discipline. If your discipline's relying on you enough to be an expert to provide those reviews. So, and I think the thing that you said to incentivize people to review is so true. I think you become a much better researcher and a much better writer when you start reviewing other people's work, because you start to realize the errors that they've made in trying to communicate their knowledge, and then you try to review your own work or review a co-author's work, one of their drafts, and you can take that lens of, if I'm a reviewer, am I getting across this information? So I 100% agree with you on that one. What do you think the solution is? Because you hear some things floated around, like you need more incentives, like should we be paying reviewers to undertake reviews? Because sometimes there's either a nothing but like a thank you and we'll give you a certificate, and other times there's almost a tokenistic thing where you have access to 40 articles, but if you're part of a university, you have access to those articles anyway. So it's kind of like you might as well offer me 2 more breaths of air or something, because I already got 2 in there. Like it's something I've already got.
Yeah, I wish there was a good solution, but I'm kind of skeptical, Zach, because academia is kind of allowed the publishing industry to take advantage,
Mm.
of our desire to publish. And, the reality is the owner of the journal and the publishers end up making money. And, there's this attempt to move to open access, which just isn't going to fly in the United States um, unless it kind of works like with library subscriptions and there's a reasonable. I think Springer's been doing a decent job of reaching deals with some U.S. libraries where there's a palatable rate for publishing open access. But when you think about it, for academic journals, like as editor, I get a small stipend, but it's like less than one consulting job I
Yeah.
would do for 50 times the time commitment. I do it voluntarily and happily, and the owner generously gives me some travel budget, so I can promote the journal. So it's just the way the system is, and I don't mean to be too critical of it, but I don't know where paying the reviewers, where the money would come from for it to be anything beyond just a token, and I should say, like, it's interesting because there is, when something in reviewing, I don't think, unfortunately, is regarded as prestigious um, enough. Or, I think it actually used to be more prestigious early in my career to be on an editorial review board.
Yeah.
Now reviewers are so in demand. There's still some level of prestige to it, but people will tend to get put on earlier, um, and it's, less. I think it used to be more contingent on the institution somebody was at than it is now, which that's a good thing that it's not, that's not taken into account as much. But I just don't see where I don't, I think the publishers make a little bit on each journal they publish, and then collectively it's a lot. But a journal that does well makes a good bid for the owner of the journal, but not so much that the owner of the journal is going to be willing, to devote resources. I don't know what would shock the system, um, to that point. I mean, unless academia got determined to, you know, change up, like really go open access, with journals that were edited within academia and not owned and published by outside entities. But I don't see how we get there because of what's the Journal of Marketing been around for since 1935 or something? Maybe longer than that. I think it's more than 100 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's right. There is almost like an ingrained system where even if there was a new journal that emerged where it was, we provide a monetary incentive for reviews and something like that. Well, it's not on any of these global lists. So academics don't get incentivized to publish there themselves. So the reviewers get incentivized, but not the academics to publish there. So it's a tough one to crack. I think what sort of topics is, so those who are listening and thinking this is a great journal, I'd love to review, they can probably reach out to you and become part of your ad hoc kind of review list, I'd imagine. What about those who are thinking, I work in marketing and I'm passionate about advertising. What topics do you kind of think will be really prevalent in your journal until maybe 2030, so the next sort of 5 years? So that gives them enough time to, have an idea, incubate it, and collect data and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think sustainability comes to mind first because it's such an important topic and it's not going to go away. I think metaverse has fallen out. The actual implementation, like I alluded to earlier, has gone more slowly than people thought it would, but I think it's still a really important topic. And some, um, you know, AR and VR topics, I think are very, very interested. Corporate social responsibility is still important, and kind of from both ends. I mean, when does I sometimes wonder because Milton Friedman's view that just producing a good product and offering a low price definitely fell out of favor. But I mean, if you're only engaging in the social responsibility to make more profit, sometimes I wonder whether Friedman's view really should have fallen out of favor as much as it did. But although I think most people, there are some win-win corporate social responsibility, programs. And I always like hearing about that. But in terms of, you know, what do consumers react to? And I'm always interested in ad effectiveness. There's um, classic topics are important as well. And see, there's some understudied areas that I'd always like to see more submissions on. Political advertising is one that comes to mind. If you review that literature, there's probably actually more published in political science journals than advertising journals, and it's kind of a different orientation. And I'll say this too, Zach. International Journal of Advertising has always had more of a societal and public policy focus than the other ad journals, largely because it's owned by the Advertising Association of the United Kingdom. That's always thinking about those types of issues like regulation and self-regulation. So they published a lot on ad regulation and societal issues. So I think we really like to see those types of submissions as well. And whenever a new technology comes along, it's difficult to regulate it. It's hard for the regulation to catch up. Like I have some real problems with some of the native advertising, and it's gradually been more. My latest editorial in International Journal of Advertising is kind of really critical of some industry players who are using artificial intelligence for dynamic pricing that penalizes loyal consumers. You get e-commerce retailer knows that I shop on their platform less than my wife, and my wife is less price sensitive. So we can get a lower price if we go through my account than her account on the same item. In the U.S., this isn't illegal. There are probably some countries where it is. But the airlines right now in the U.S. are terrible with that, offering lower price upgrades to less frequent flyers. And they justify that based on, we want to make them frequent flyers. But I think the reality is when their promotion is saying, they're sending direct promotions to their most loyal customers, that you're our best customer and we're going to take care of you. Well, that's not taking care of people. It's price gouging in the way it's implemented. So these types of social and public policy issues are very much of interest as well. But I wanted to say sometimes it takes, early in an academic career, we pretty much know what the hot topics are. And some of what I think is my best work, one of my best papers, I think, is on outdoor advertising. But when I wrote it, I knew it was only going to get a modest number of citations compared to other things that I do. But I stand by. I think it's a good piece of work. And then I've had a few other ones that, not that I think it's not a good piece of work, but I don't know that it's among my very best. But it gets cited more because of the topic.
Yeah, and citations make a huge difference for like your research profile and those promotion applications and stuff like that. Before we move on from like discussing the journal, do you have like a highlight or something you're most proud of achieving at the journal? I mean, your 10 years there has been incredible, but I'm sure there's something that's really stood out.
Yeah. We put out a 40th anniversary issue that, like, I think a lot of the best scholars that do advertising research participated in. And it really ended up getting well cited. But like there was one on, influencer marketing where we brought together like Lieselot Hutters from Ghent University in Belgium and Chen Liu from NTU in Singapore, and they wrote a really good article. We had a great article on diversity and inclusion that Martin Eisend and Sarah Rosengren and another author put together that gave more. I really liked the article because different countries have their own perspective on diversity and inclusion, and especially in the U.S., it's easy to lose sight of that fact that it doesn't mean the same thing everywhere. So it spurred it spurred some growth. But I'll say this, Zach, I think I think I am proud of how firmly entrenched we are now in that upper echelon of advertising journals, and that we're doing well in in all parts of the world. And as I mentioned, getting the editorial team more legitimately spread out, and letting I don't know, when I started in academia, things were so U.S. centric, and I think we've come a long way. The U.S. based journals have done a much better job of wanting to internationalize, and most of them have done a pretty good job. But there's another step to go where people in a given country really feel that their work is welcomed, and I think in the past, like somebody somebody even in a country as large as Italy would have to think twice about sending an Italian data set to a good journal, just because it wasn't viewed. It's still the case that when you want to test a theory and you want to get results that have some level of generalizability, but there's no reason why an Italian data set can't be just as generalizable as a U.S. or Chinese, um, data set. So I take some pride in that. I mean that said, you can't have a paper like on an obscure law, that only applies in one state of the United States. You know what I mean? Because then that's not generalizable to anywhere else. But
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really good because there was that tendency for US data sets to be a little bit more upweighted, I guess, in the review process. I, for one, I'm slightly biased because I come from an institute that promotes generalizable research. So, although we love American data, like we like to collect data from as many diverse situations as we
yeah,
can if we find the same thing. So, something like Italy would be a great addition to that. Um, so normally at this time, we like to talk about a little bit to do with research. So you have a really, really impressive academic record, over 22,000 citations. But what's really cool about this is you have a H index of almost 70 now. So that means you have almost 70 articles that have each been cited almost 70 times each, which is the higher the H index gets, the harder the incremental step becomes, just for those who are listening and is unsure about it. So it definitely is impressive. Um, so rather than talking about a specific research article, I thought what we could do is talk about, now I think it's a book that you've published with a few colleagues. The book is called Winning the Advertising Game, Lessons from the Super Bowl Ad Champions, which is right in your wheelhouse and your expertise, that reputation that you were building throughout your career. Did you want to tell me about how this book came about and a little bit about your co-authors?
yeah. Well, I'm pleased to say, Zach, I can show it on screen just briefly because
Awesome.
it just came out, and I think it's only right now. It's only they're taking pre-orders, but I think they'll actually start shipping like next week. And I don't mean that to like really hawk the book. I just want to say it's relatively new. But I started working with Sasha Reithel, who's at the Free University of Berlin, and I had actually met him when he was a doctoral student at Ludwig Maximilian's University in Munich, working for my friend Manfred Schweiger, who works there. And he's a big sports fan. And I'd been doing a little bit of work on Super Bowl advertising, like coding the ads and trying to see what drove effectiveness. But I started working with Sasha, who's an incredibly good data analyst, and we were able to get so here at Villanova, we've been coding the Super Bowl ads on like every variable you can possibly think, for about the last 25 years. And Sasha got access to YouGov data, their big panel that tracks consumer perceptions of brands on like a daily basis. So we started being able to do time series analysis to like track reaction to Super Bowl ads. We would look at, how did the panel what was their awareness of the brand in the days before the Super Bowl, and then the days after the Super Bowl, and how long did it last? And YouGov has measures at all levels of the marketing funnel. So we're able to address questions like whether a Super Bowl ad is worth it. I mean, are the advertisers meeting their goals? And like how long, in terms of wear out, how long does the impact of a typical Super Bowl ad last? And looking at variables as to what drives effectiveness. And I think um, we published an article in Journal of Business Research first that was on whether taking out a Super Bowl ad has any impact on the stock price. Um, and then we had one kind of on social, some societal issues like representation of women and minorities in the Super Bowl ads that we published in Journal of Consumer Affairs. And we published a piece in Journal of Advertising that was looking at whether uniqueness of an ad helped it to stand out and perform more effectively, and for advertisers that advertise in multiple years, um, whether consistency played a role. And we got some real interesting findings. And in the meantime, I do all this media. I think I did 4 TV interviews this year, including like Good Morning America and some print. It ebbs and flows from year to year, like which print outlets I talk to. But like in the past, I've done like Wall Street Journal and New York Times and USA Today. Places like this. Plus writing for Forbes. So I get some contacts with industry people, and we quote some of the industry people involved in making the ads. So then the next edition, I hope we get it. Boy, it's a lot of effort in the States to get practitioners to be willing to go on record about their strategy, even with successful ads. Well, interestingly enough, once somebody retires, it's very easy to get to them to talk to you about what they did. But so it's a mix of like academic analysis of what's effective, combined with some insight from managers. And I should mention we've 2 other co-authors. Dave Stewart, who technically retired, but a guy I really admire, former editor of Journal of Marketing and Journal of Academy Marketing Science. And I think he did Journal of Public Policy and Marketing for a while too, but a true academic who wrote this content coding we did. I based a lot of the original coding scheme based on his book, Effective Television Advertising. And we're finding in that book, he found that brand differentiating messages were like the most important driver of effectiveness. And we got some interesting findings around that variable with Super Bowl advertising. But also Alex Maffel is he was a former PhD student of Sasha's, and he's now at the Stockholm School of Economics. So it's a team I actually absolutely love working with. One scholar who's senior to me that I always looked up to, and 2 are junior to me, but are super hardworking, and I look up to them in a different way. They're really good at what they do.
Yeah, sounds like an amazing team. So who had this spark of ideas? So you had a few different papers that you'd co-authored together in various different journals, from Journal of Advertising through to Journal of Business Research. And what was that spark, or I might have missed it, that said we need to compile this and make it a book that's more accessible? And I've read parts of the book, but is the language more driven towards practitioners than academics?
I think it's some of both. So it's published by Springer, and they call it Business Guides to Go. So they definitely wanted us to write it so managers can read it. And I think it really is geared at managers and academics. There's a few chapters that somebody that's had no training in business would enjoy, like the 10 best Super Bowl ads. But a lot of it's like, there's a lot of data analysis and charts that are really getting to the bottom of what works and what drives, Super Bowl ad effectiveness, or like what the half-life of a Super Bowl ad is, or something like that. So if I dare to say it, I think it's something that that people at Ehrenberg Bass would like, because there's a managerial focus to it, but it's still academic as well. Which as you know, I really admire the work of the people in your institute, because you don't lose sight of manager relevance. And every time I read something out of the institute, there's some counterintuitive points that even if I might not agree like 100%, it just a few of the points in Byron and Jenny's books have gotten me to think completely differently about what I teach.
For those of us who are looking to pre-order this book, whereabouts can we place the order? Amazon, maybe?
Amazon has it, yeah. Springer, Springer's like the main website, but I think these days, Zach, every book retailer, gets so many different books. I think you can find it almost anywhere.
Yeah, and it looked like a hardcover. Is that right?
Yeah, it can be ordered like electronically.
Yeah.
On like on Amazon, you can order on Kindle, for less money. Fortunately, I like the cover, and I bought copies. It's funny because they only give us. It's kind of ironic, but like casual acquaintances or people that I went through high school with probably view this. I've had other edited books, and I did something on premise signage that was a book that I really wrote, but they view it as like a lifelong accomplishment. You know what I mean? Whereas, unfortunately, in academia, although I'm really proud of this book, I think they're kind of underappreciated. I just got something. I just got an article accepted at Journal of Advertising, and I'll certainly get far more credit for that from my institution than from the book. Although my institution does appreciate that I do media, but you know how that goes. It's one of those things that's kind of it's great that they appreciate it, but like when it comes up on merit, it just doesn't count what a journal article does. I don't know what to do about it, because journal articles are really important, but sometimes I wish people would get more credit for academic books. In the States, this goes back. People used to actually make a lot of money off of textbooks. But to any young scholars contemplating books, most people I talk to now, they don't pay much. And like the Forbes column I write, people think of that as really prestigious. But boy, it's almost embarrassing to say what it pays. The base is only $25 an article, and then it depends on how many people read it. And because they're behind a paywall, you know what I mean? There's limits to how many people read it. So mostly not that lucrative, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. But it's just that I definitely didn't do this for the money. We just wanted to write something good. And meanwhile, it's kept the team together, and we've got something under revision at Journal of the Academy of Marketing Science that I hope, it's really kind of to me, it's the main payoff piece of all the analysis that we've been doing, because it focuses on what really, what really is most likely to make a Super Bowl ad effective. We actually had a similar piece that we got to revise and resubmit at Journal of Marketing Research, but they really wanted us to do so many different things that we couldn't get the team. We didn't. Not all four of us had the time to do what needed to be done, because we make different contributions. But I'm happy that JMR was at least willing to consider a revision. But it's one of those things where we timed out on it.
Okay, to make the revisions.
Yeah. But we did. But we all love Journal of Academy of Marketing Science too, and we're hoping, to get it published there. But we'll see. Even though, like I said, Zach, I'm pretty confident in what I do. Certainly, I still have papers rejected.
People look up to.
Yeah, I mean, when it happens, you
Well,
just have to
one of the
recognize, if
three
you did
top
your best,
advertising journals in the
just
world, and have
send it somewhere
made that
else
journal
and
go from
take what
strength
you
to
can out
strength.
of the
Incredible
reviews.
research career. We've seen your statistics there. Um, it's so it's, I don't know, a bit of a relief or to hear you say that, I'm also not perfect. I also have papers rejected. I also experience the same things as you. It does, I think, help people in my position to realize that, the people we look up to are also human. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, Zach, in my career when I was younger, um, I would be at conferences. You would hear, some of the most elite people that have ever been marketing professors will tell stories about their papers getting rejected and how they react to it. So, with top journals rejecting 95% of papers, it's just going to happen, and you just need to learn from it, and keep your confidence up. And at least we're fortunate that it's an unfortunate caveat, like you said, that like people that are tied to that British list have less options. But when you believe in a paper, and assuming there's not some fatal flaw, but as we're at it longer, we're less likely to do work on anything that has fatal flaws. Um, you usually can get it in somewhere good. And I've also heard some really elite scholars talk about how, a paper, at a
Back to your
great journal
book, I
like
think this is
Journal
a
of
really kind of
Marketing,
cool structure, right? Based around Super
it was
Bowl
just extremely
advertising.
hard to
The
get it
fact
through the
that the
review
structure,
process, and
which
they
I
thought it
think
was
is
going to
really
get
important for any
rejected,
piece of
but
writing,
then
but these
it
chapters
got
are
in and
quite
it
clever.
becomes the
You
best
have like
paper.
pre-game,
So
and then each of the chapters is, elements of what the Super Bowl would actually be. And then at the end, there's like a post-game summary. I thought that was kind of cool, because it's on pre-order now, and we want people to order the book, and I'll try to remember to put links to the book in the show notes. But I thought we could give everyone a bit of a taste, a bit of a flavor for this. And you said one of the most accessible chapters is that first chapter where you talk about successful Super Bowl ads and the sort of research
mhm.
behind those. Some of the ads that you documented, which I think most people would be aware of, is that sort of that Betty White iconic "You're not you when you're hungry" ad. That was really kind of cool, and Apple's sort of 1984 ad. There are of course 8 others there, but did you want to provide us a bit of an overview as to what are those elements that you were analyzing, and what would make a really good Super Bowl ad?
Yeah, the main thing we found, Zach, it's kind of fascinating because there are very commonly used devices in Super Bowl ads where I think both of them, I have to follow this stuff because of the media I do. Um, but both last year and this year, more than 70% of the ads will have a celebrity in them. And a majority use humor as well. So these are real common creative devices that we see. But our research shows that when you analyze this big data set of ads we've got over years, just including a celebrity or having humor in the ad doesn't drive success at all on any of those measures of the funnel. It doesn't make the ad more or less willing to succeed. Now that in no way means like if you have the best the Super Bowl ad that was most liked last year had Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito in it for State Farm, and they kind of made fun in a clever way of Schwarzenegger's, you know,
Okay.
Austrian accent.
Yeah.
So it can work. But if you don't, what it boils down to in our research, it really shows that the winning combination is having a brand differentiating message and having the ad liked simultaneously. Like if the ad is only liked,
What would an
it's
example of
not
a
brand
brand
focused enough,
differentiating
it
message
won't
be?
be successful. And if the ad's disliked, even if it has a brand differentiating message, it won't drive success on most of those measures. One of the winners last year was this relatively new brand called the Farmer's dog food. And the ad starts out with a little girl playing with her dog, and then it shows her going through life. And of course, they're feeding the dog farmer's this farmer's dog food, and at the end of the ad, she's older and the dog's, lived a good life and is getting ill. But it really reinforced. It was emotional, but it reinforced that they were taking care of their dog because of the high quality, this dog food. So they were focusing really on the nutritional value of that dog food. It's one that's pretty clever this year, Zach, because you're asking a good question. And I think our author team, the definition we use of a brand differentiating message is like a yes or no. And I think there's an opening for research on like different types of brand differentiating messages, because some of them in really competitive markets, it's more difficult to do than it used to be. And actually, the way we coded it, less than half of the ads have a brand differentiating message. And Dave Stewart believes strongly part of that's because some of the brands just don't have one. But there's, another good example from this year. Hellman's Mayonnaise has an ad that I think is going to be one of the best liked ads, where it's the old movie that was real popular, When Harry Met Sally, with Billy Crystal and Meg. I don't know if it was popular in Australia, um, but I think it was pretty successful worldwide. And even like most younger Americans have seen that movie. And uh, there's a real clever uh, scene where Meg Ryan gets really excited. I guess I can say that in this podcast. She's faking an orgasm in the scene, and then there's a funny remark from a lady like, "I'll have what she's having." They're at a deli eating, so they recreate that. Um, but what Meg's getting excited about this time is she's eating it's in Katz Deli in New York is where they filmed it, which is a real famous Manhattan deli that makes good food. But they show her eating the sandwich with all this Hellman's mayonnaise on it. The message is it just makes it taste so good. It's going to give you, physical sensation. But I think that's a good brand differentiating message. And then cleverly they have the actress Sydney Sweeney. I didn't know, I'm too old. I didn't know that much about her, but she's an attractive young actress that appeals to Gen Z very much. So she delivers the line, "I'll have what she's having." But I showed it to my class to make sure, I never know whether something nostalgic like that, whether the younger generation can relate to it, but they all knew that movie and they thought the ad was really funny. But the flip side of that is you've got to be careful, because there was an ad that Burger King did for it was the great artist, modern artist Andy Warhol, who most Americans over 45 would be really familiar with who Andy Warhol was. But it was just a very artsy ad where Andy Warhol had filmed himself, eating a Whopper, which he was famous for, like painting the Campbell's soup can, for example. But anyways, that ad scored really well with really older consumers, but younger consumers mostly didn't know who Andy Warhol was. And it's like, what the heck? What the heck is this? But anyway, just something very different about the brand, where they can legitimately make a claim that there's something unique about the brand. And sometimes it's more involved, like Bosch. You might like this because of doing the Forbes column. I got to interview Antonio Banderas, who's the big A-list movie star, proves to be a pretty, really personable guy. But Bosch, the German company, is using him in their ad. They've got a pretty lofty objective, because Bosch sells a lot in the United States, appliances, power tools, and like automotive parts. But most Americans don't have a general brand image of Bosch. So they're trying to get across the idea that you can be confident because Bosch products are innovative. So they're trying to get across this image of confidence, which I think Banderas is well suited to get across. The final ad isn't being released until the Super Bowl itself, but they are trying to use a brand differentiating message, based on this notion that using Bosch, you've got this innovative, reliable product, and it makes you confident. They're trying to differentiate it like a broader level, like image of users. But as I'm sure you've probably read, in these competitive industries, like BMW goes from the ultimate driving machine to the ultimate driver, because they want to differentiate based on the image of the user. And I mean, so many of the automobiles are so much better made now that it's more difficult to differentiate based on product features. But anyways, hopefully more to come on like different types and levels of brand differentiating messages. I think the effects we've got show
Yeah,
that
I
what
think
we
it's
did was really
seems like
useful.
some really cool
That
research
said, a good
that they're
academic like
highly
yourself will
emotive. So you
pick
said a
up
lot of
on.
ads were trying to really
Um,
emphasize the
it
humor
would be
aspect
nice if
of
there was a scale
that
to
can get
measure
people
like levels of
emotive. But then
differentiation and do the
the
analysis
little
that
girl growing
way.
up with a dog has that that sad emotive thing, and I think that's what a lot of the research sort of suggests, right? Is that humans are better at creating memories when they feel something. So if your ad's able to do that, then yeah, that seems to work pretty well. Um, so with Super Bowl ads, do you think they have some sort of
Yeah,
ability to communicate stories in like a 30-second ad better than a
yeah,
normal TV ad that has higher levels of ad avoidance? Because the Super Bowl is kind of a strange thing where it's like there is this big, I mean, it's primarily American, but it's a global sporting event. And but there's the ads are also, they're not a sideshow. They're almost like they're almost like co-hosting the event together.
yeah. I mean, that's right. And Nielsen did a survey a few years back that showed that slightly more than half of Super Bowl
Yeah.
watchers look forward to the ads more than they look forward, to the game, which is pretty amazing. But there's definitely heightened attention and a lot of anticipation. I mean, the flip side of that is that there's high expectations, and it's difficult for to get your ad to stand out. But they most of the advertisers really put their best foot forward. And when I see the ads, I really think most of them are really good, but expectations are so high that when I talk to just friends that don't understand marketing, it really surprises me how often they say, "Well, I don't think there were very many good ones this year," but it's just a matter of the expectations being high. But people do pay more attention. And one ad I should call your attention to um, this year, Zach, because anybody that teaches marketing, this is one of the more interesting ads I've seen in many years. It's not. It's pretty well known that the U.S. has an obesity problem with too many people being overweight and in some cases way overweight. So this company called Hims and Hers, it's a telehealth company that they actually have separate units, Hims and Hers, and Hims sells products more geared at men related to health. So like, it could be hair loss or Viagra or whatever it is, where hers is more women's products. But there's some products that affect, both genders evenly, and weight loss products
Okay.
are one. But interesting enough, this company got approval to market an over-the-counter product that has the same active ingredient as Ozempic and other weight loss drugs. That, from everything I read, like a lot of people who are obese have had success losing weight on Ozempic. But Ozempic is really expensive and is not covered. Um, I actually think, for the most part, the U.S. health insurance system is pretty good for most people. But there's an exam. Some places it falls apart a little bit, and like weight loss drugs, the insurance companies like really don't want to cover except for in really extreme cases. So it costs, these drugs, the prescription ones, cost more than most Americans can afford, like 1,900 US a month or something like that. So this over-the-counter alternative that Hims and Hers has costs something like 75% or more or less. And people have to talk to a doctor beforehand and whatnot. But they run this really kind of dark ad focused on the obesity epidemic in the United States, and these images of people overweight and unhealthy. There's even an image of brief image of animals fighting to the death in there. And then they're critical of the US healthcare system. But at the end, they show that they offer an alternative. And there's a strong implication that it's lower price. I don't think they pin themselves down to an exact price. But what's interesting about this ad is I think, it's been previewed over the last couple of weeks, and it's actually had an impact on this company's stock price. It's been going up, but now the pharmaceutical trade associations are really fighting against it and trying to get um, the Fox network to ban it and not let it run. And they're arguing that at a regulatory level that this company doesn't have to. I don't know how familiar you are with the U.S. Most of the world doesn't allow prescription drug advertising, but the U.S. does. But there's these terrible disclaimers that people make fun of. You know, may cause you to lose sleep. Grow hives, and in some cases die. They're pretty bad disclosures of side effects, but I think people get immune to them because they recognize that most of the side effects are relatively rare. But there is, if you don't do that, there really is a risk of there being too much of a downside to prescription drug advertising. So it's easy to understand the motive. But if this ad airs, it's obvious to me it's gonna do really good things for the sales of this product because it's so much cheaper and the problem is very real.
Yes.
But it's causing regulatory controversy, and it's causing the competitors to get into a nasty fight with them. And these competitors are really, really well funded. So yeah, they make Ozempic and another one of the big ones. There's other companies that have one too, but yeah, Novo, they're number one in this product category. But right, yeah, when I looked this week, like we teach product life cycle, and I'm not so sure that they would. On one hand, there's a segment of the market that would probably desert Ozempic, but it's bringing attention to these products in general. So I'm not so sure that it would hurt the more expensive products either.
So I've taken
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think my understanding is that Ozempic is injections or something like that. So if this
I'd say
is like a digestible
I would say the same thing. I need to think about the impact on primary versus secondary demand.
Would like to take this drug, but they wouldn't want to. Yeah. Oh, there's a whole bunch of things to think about. I've taken a huge amount of your time today, so I really, really, really appreciate it. I have a couple more questions, if that's okay. Besides your forthcoming book, which is I'm going to put a pre-order on as soon as I can. Is there any other books that sort of stand out in your career, or that you'd recommend us reading? It could be
sure
as well. It could be things that we should enjoy for leisure, and doesn't have to be marketing.
I think there's so many, but I do like the books out of your institute, quite honestly.
Okay.
How brands grow. It's funny because it came, I knew about it, but it came more to my attention because some students in my MBA class in branding would mention it to me. From organization like Campbell's or Johnson and Johnson, now Kenvue, maybe because Ehrenberg Bass, works with that. Used to be a good advertising book called Hitting the Sweet Spot that I always liked a lot. But that's gotten a little bit older now. But it's amazing though, Zach, when I do expert witness work, it's amazing how often I go back to the textbooks, and like a really good textbook, like in advertising, like the Belch brothers, George Belch and Mickey Belch. They really integrate a lot of academic literature into it, or Terry Shimp and Craig Andrews. are another really good one. So I enjoy that as well. Yeah, it's funny because when I think about this, I think back to some classics. Although I definitely like the branding gurus, a lot of the David Ocker books or Kevin Lane Keller um, as well. I like Keller's brand resonance model a lot. I think it gets one, thinking really
Sounds good. So some of this
holistically.
audience is,
And the old,
undergraduates or
some of the Laura
postgraduates, and they're
Trout
looking
work now that
to
follows
gain their
up
first
on the
entry
old
level role or to progress
Reason
within
Trout,
their
like positioning, product
within their
positioning work I
organization.
like as
Do you have any
well.
advice for these people? Yeah.
Yeah, well, really read a lot of popular press literature and, keep current on what new developments are.
That's a good point.
Take advantage, for younger people, take advantage that because of technology, you're coming in with a skill set that some of the senior people in your organization don't really have. I mean, I'm not a technological illiterate, but my son could show me 50 things on my phone I could do more efficiently, quite easily. But when I have guest speakers in my branding class, well now because I'm in my early 60s, oftentimes they're a little bit younger than me, but they're still quite a bit older than people coming out. But if I ask them about like what's their company doing with metaverse, they'll often say, well, we're being trained on it, and we're starting to learn more about it and we're doing a little bit. But somebody that's grown up and in and is regularly on the consumer side in metaverse is probably going to have a lot better ideas as to what will work and what won't work, or a phenomenon like NFTs or uses of artificial intelligence. I think in my class of 25 undergrads for branding this semester, I think 25 out of 25 have used artificial intelligence in more ways and more effectively than I have. I mean, I know I should learn more about it, but you just get when you don't grow up with the technology, it's harder to find the time to really learn it, other than for purposes that you really. Yeah, I'll tell you, Zach, I'm absolutely intrigued by the notion that people have always told me that I'm a good writer, but wordsmithing gets old pretty quick. And if there's a way to use AI to make my an ethical way, to make my writing smoother and not waste as much time on wordsmithing, I'd love to do it. But like similarly in creating ads, for example, and also considering, what younger consumers are going to rebel against with versus what's acceptable. Um,
Yeah, I think
young people
especially
go into
AI
organizations with really
is really
good
the one to watch. So
ability
last
to
year,
have ideas on
2024,
this.
huge
And if they
amounts of
approach it the
money,
right
like
way and
billions
relating
upon
it to
billions,
senior
Microsoft,
management, I think it'll
Google,
very much,
Apple, all of big tech players,
be
Meta,
appreciated.
all funded tens of billions of dollars into AI. And there's been huge growth in all of these companies, but AI has yet to show a lot of investors where this is actually going to generate revenue. So at the moment, it's a massive expense, and they're putting a lot of money into potentially opening up their own nuclear power plants to fund these data centers. And then the people who are the data center providers, they're all astronomically growing in price. But the feeling is in
Yeah.
2025, it's like you need to be able to show us where the AI will generate that revenue. And I think I think you're actually onto something. And I hadn't thought about it till you said it, which is this next generation coming through, having grown up with it, it might not be 2025, it might be 2035 before we see the real big outcomes of it, because they're AI natives, right? They call my generation somewhat digital natives or something. We're the first generation that grew up not. Well, I had Google when I was in year 3, I think. But this next generation and AI it probably could be 10 years away.
I think so. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I should have mentioned in terms of like submissions to IJA, we
Yes.
did a special issue, but I'd love to see more on AI, because you're right; it's got a long way to evolve. But we know it. I mean, we know this is one we know is coming, and the ethical issues are, the ethical issues are important too. Like, where does it, so, I've seen predictions
Yes, that's a
that at
big
some
thing.
point in
And
the
also,
future, there's going to be no
I
need
guess the
for
battle of global
truck
superpowers with,
drivers,
AI
and,
coming out with like DeepSeek,
which
for
would
example,
mean,
resonating out of
you
China
know,
versus,
hundreds of thousands of
Copilot from
job
Microsoft
losses,
or
well,
OpenAI, so
millions in the
ChatGPT. So
US, I guess.
even geopolitically, AI has a massive run to play. Um, just to finish up, I like to ask just one sort of simple question, like whether there's any life advice you'd want to pass on to the audience, whether it's a saying or a phrase or something that you live by, just something to really leave us with
Yeah.
and to incorporate and embrace in our own lives.
Yeah. You know, work on, work on something that you're really interested in. I alluded to earlier, starting out in engineering, and I wouldn't have been able to work long hours as effectively in that field. And the material was frankly, not that I couldn't learn it; it was harder for me to learn. So
Yeah,
work on things that you're really interested in, and kind of go all in. And if you want to be successful, recognize it really does take working a lot of hours. But I feel like when you're successful, there's a lot of rewards that make it worthwhile. And you've always got time to think. You've always got time to think about work-life balance. If you're really successful in academia, if you're a lot of people are full professors by the time they're 45, and if they really get to the point where they want to, then they can cut back. But it just makes it easier if you're interested in what you're working on and you're intellectually curious. And there are some side effects, Zach. Like I'm embarrassed by like how few popular
yeah,
books I read, like mysteries or anything like that. But it's because I'm reading business books all the time, and it's kind of like somebody that does, people that do landscaping for a living often live in houses that aren't well landscaped. You know what I mean? Because they just get tired of it. Um, but if you keep working on something that you love, and keep in mind, um, if you go to if you love marketing and you have a career in marketing, um, you probably won't burn out on it. I mean, I'm glad we don't have a mandatory retirement age in the United States. I mean, I'll have to see what I
yeah.
feel
Wow.
like, um, in 10 years, but I'm in my early 60s and not planning on retiring soon. I don't know that I'll be the guy. Stephen Greiser at Harvard has gone well into his 90s, and I don't see myself doing that. But well, if I'm even around at, at that point, but I'd also mention, Zach, I'd alluded to it earlier, and it applies in different realms of life. But I've really gotten ahead by having a fundamental belief in my work. Something that I probably could have applied in some other areas of life earlier, or for whatever reason it might have been harder for me to do. But I guess because I was putting so much into it,
No.
deep down I would believe in the work, and not get discouraged by rejections. And academics who are perfectionists tend not to succeed, because there's
Yes,
no
yes, because it's
perfect
not just
paper.
quality, it's
I mean,
quantity as well.
yeah,
And
it has to
everyone
be
needs to
good,
find
and you
their
have
own
to be
balance in
happy
that.
with it, but you
Yeah, that
can't
was
be looking to
unbelievable.
make it perfect, or
Basically, you've done something that
it'll
everybody is
never get
passionate
submitted,
about,
or you
and
won't get enough things submitted.
you've managed to not, you've managed to really enjoy. Seems to be every minute of it, and you find yourself so fortunate to do that.
I'll say this, Zach. I can't honestly say I enjoy every minute
Um,
of it. Nobody really likes grading paper. A stack of 50 papers. Nobody really enjoys, um, after I've written the first draft of a academic or Forbes article. No one really enjoys. This is another place where I should be better on technology. The amount of time in my career I've wasted on getting references in standard format is ridiculous. Although I'm a little bit better than I used to, but there are mundane tasks, but they pale in comparison to the better parts of it. But me, I really would recommend an academic career, and networking. Networking is also very important, but getting to travel and meet really interesting people, and friends is just amazing. Unfortunately, when I was younger, I went through a divorce, and
Amazing. Thank you
it
so
definitely made
much.
a good choice the second
Really
time. So
enjoyed
I've been married a long time and
talking to you
very
so
happily
much.
so. But like friends from around
thank
the
you so much,
world
Ray.
came to my wedding, and it was just really, really wonderful.
Hi everyone, Zac here again, and just a few quick reminders before you go. If you're listening to the podcast and are considering incorporating it into your secondary school or university courses, then please let me know and I can guide you through the process. If you're enjoying the show and getting some insights from it, then please leave me a 5-star review on your podcast listening platform. It would go a long way to spreading the word. If you know someone who would benefit from this content, then I would be thrilled if you could consider sharing this episode and its knowledge with them. And finally, thank you for becoming part of the community for this show.